first class that we're looking at here is bottom fragment, and what we want to do is change this from last week so it now extends ListFragment. So next we want to remove the onCreateView method, as that's already implemented in the superclass ListFragment, and we change the method, the lifecycle method that we're implementing, to onActivityCreated. So remember, onCreateView is already now taken care of in ListFragment. So in onActivityCreated, we call super onActivityCreated and pass the instance of the bundle. The next thing we want to do is create a package for our controller, and also a package for our model object, which in the case of this app will be a flight object. So within our controller package or directory, we want to create our controller class, and we're going to call it main controller. And within our model directory or package, we're going to create a Java class there, which is going to be flight, which is just going to be a simple model object. So here what we're going to do is just add in the basic gets, sets. So we just have string origin, string destination, and a regular constructor, sets, and get methods. But what we do want to do here is override the toString method. So instead of returning the default toString that it gets from object, it returns the origin and the destination separated by a dash. So just a human readable string. So back to main controller, and what we want to do here is set this up as a singleton. So we create our static instance of this class, and this is the normal way of creating a singleton. So we create our getInstance method as normal for a singleton, so that we only ever return one instance. So if it's not created, we create it. If it's already created, we return what has been the instance that's been created. Now within our controller, we're going to create a reference to our model. So our model is going to be just an array list of flight objects. We have our private constructor, which is normal in singletons, and here we create an instance of our array list of flight objects. So next we're going to provide a method where user can supply in a string origin and string destination. We will create an instance of a flight object and add that to the array list of flights. So this is the controller doing the job of adding a flight. And finally, we provide a getFlights method, which will return the entire flights list. So remember, this is the method on the controller, which is retrieving the model. So now let's go back to top fragment from last week, and here we want to change how this fragment communicates outwards. So whereas before it was sending two strings, now the only message it's going to be sending is the top fragment telling the bottom fragment to refresh itself. It will refresh itself from the model, which is now separate. So we change the method to refresh flight list. And here, when we click on the button, we now call the refresh flight list method. That calls out to the parent activity. Same pattern as last week. But an extra step we'll add here, instead of passing the origin and destination through the activity to the bottom fragment like last week, this week we are going to add them directly to the model using the controller, so using the addFlight method of the controller. So we pass the two strings there. Remember that the addFlight method creates a flight object with the two of those strings and adds it to the list of flights, which is the model. So now we've got to main activity, which is the implementer of the interface. The top fragment communicating out, so we delete some of the code from last week. We'll still be looking up the bottom fragment, so we can leave that there. And this method is now called refresh flight list. So bottom fragment is now going to have a method which will refresh the list. Remembering bottom fragment is now a list fragment, so we'll put a method on that called refresh list to replace the method that we had in there last week called display frag query result. So now if we go to bottom fragment, we set up our ArrayAdapter, which is the middleman between our flight objects and our list fragment. So it's going to adapt the array list of flights for our list fragment. So here, within our onActivity created, we get the flights from the model. We now create an instance of our adapter. So this is the adapter which is sitting between the array list of flights and this list in this fragment. So the three arguments here are the activity, first of all, then the type of thing that we are adapting for. So we use this constant from android.or.layout. And it's .simple list item 1. And finally, the raw list of flights which we retrieved from the model, or which is the model we retrieved via the controller in the previous line. And finally here we just call setListAdapter, which is a method we've inherited from ListFragment, and pass it the adapter that we've just created. Next, we implement the refresh list method, which we are going to be calling from the activity. So whereas last week we were passing data from the top fragment through the activity to the bottom fragment, we're now just passing a message telling the bottom fragment, which is now a list fragment, to refresh itself. And the way we do that is called this.adapter .notify data set changed. If we want to intervene when an item in the list is clicked, we implement the onListItemClick method. So what we want to do here is we want to launch another activity which will take the object selected in the list fragment and display it in a new activity. So to launch a new activity, we need an intent, and our new activity is going to be called flight view activity, which we'll write in a moment. So we have got the selected position in the list, so we can get our list of model objects and take because what's in our list directly reflects what's in our model. So if the selected position in the list, if we use that to take that object out of that index of the model, it will be the same object. And now we're packaging in the bundle, we're putting the selected flight object, and we need to do one thing to allow this to happen, is to make flight implement serializable. So what's going to happen here is that the bundle going from the bottom fragment, which is automatically created with an intent, is going to arrive in the new activity with this extra piece of information hanging off it or attached to it, which is the selected flight serialized object. So the next thing we're going to do is create our new flight view activity. Actually, that's in the wrong directory there, so that'll need to move out of the test and up alongside the rest of the classes there in a moment. So this is just a regular activity, the regular onCreate. So the usual calling super.onCreate, and the next we'll call setContentView. So we're referring to the XML file there, which we haven't written yet, which we'll write in a moment. And the next thing we do is we unpack the serialized object which was sent across when this activity was launched via an intent. So we call getIntent, which gives us the intent which launched this activity, and call getSerializable extra using the same key that we used when we put the serialized object in at the point of launching. And we know this is a flight object, so we can cast it to a flight object. Next, we're going to have a text view in this activity. It's going to be the only GUI component in this activity. So we look that up as usual by its ID and set the text and use the toString object of the toString method of the flight object. So finally now we're going to go and create the layout file for this flight view activity. So we're going to make it relative layout. And use the usual naming convention, so activity underscore flight view. So that's created, and now we're going to go to the text part of it and just add a text view in directly in the XML. And called flight display field. So here I've moved flight view activity over to where it should be with the other activities and fragments. And we see now that it's picking up the XML file that we created. So finally, we must remember that every new activity must be declared in the Android manifest. So here, bringing in our flight view activity, we'll just make sure it's specified in the right package. An important thing to note here is the new attribute called parent activity name. So the parent activity is the activity which launches this activity. So in this case, flight view activity is being launched from main activity. So that's where we use parent activity name there. And we usually include some metadata here as well. The name of the metadata is android.support.parentActivity, and again we're specifying there that the parent activity is main activity. So now if we launch our app, click Find Flights, we see things appearing in the list below. And if we click on a list item below, it launches a new activity, passes the flight object, and we see the string at the far end.